Monday. We're going to go ahead and get started here. My name is Laura Cummings. I am the president of the Commercial Smallsat Spectrum Management Association, or Cssma. And we are the ones who, with our member organizations, have put together this special session today to talk about sustainability issues and spectrum. So just a brief recap of Cssma. We are a trade organization organized in the US, but with global membership that has an objective to expand spectrum awareness, spectrum coordination, and education. So our purpose is really to facilitate conversations and educate smaller organizations that may not have in-house regulatory help or just don't have the resources of kind of your large geotelcos. So today we're excited to be here and talking about spectrum and sustainability issues. The way that this is kind of organized to be set up is our secretary is going to come up and really briefly give kind of a 10-minute overview of what radio frequency is, spectrum coordination issues, and why we care about it. And then after that, several of our member organizations are going to talk for about 2 minutes each, just to briefly introduce their organization and issues that they're having related to spectrum and spectrum sustainability. And then after that, we're going to really open it up and hope to get the audience involved, because our goal from this is to both raise awareness but also move towards understanding of sustainability best practices as they relate to small satellites. So I'll be taking notes, and hopefully we can build essentially a best practices document after this. Yeah, and I think that's about it. So welcome. Thank you for attending our session. If you guys are interested in being members of Cssma, you can find our application online at cssma.space. And I will hand it over to Matteo to talk about spectrum.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well, that you partied enough yesterday, but not too much, as you're here at 10. That's good. As Laura mentioned, I will now give a very quick, maybe not. I don't know. Can we move to the next slide? All right, yeah, thank you. Great, thank you. Okay, so I will now quickly give an overview on spectrum management, radio frequency, what it is, to make sure that we all have like a common base. I'm going to steer away from technicalities. I'm not an engineer myself, so you're safe from that one. Yes, we would like to have this very interactive, as Laura mentioned. So at the end of these presentations, you will also see a QR code to join on Slido, where you will actually be able to pick up some of the topics that we choose that we might be able to discuss together. And so we can try to have the conversation in the direction that you would like it to go. So spectrum management. Spectrum management, what I'm going to talk about is first why radio frequency is important. We will look at how does satellite communication actually work, what frequencies we usually talk about, in particular in the Smallsat kind of context, what is spectrum management and specifically, and then going through the main, let's say, pillars of spectrum management, which are the submission of a satellite filing, the coordination process, and the protection of a filing. So why radio frequency is important? Well, we live in a wireless world. It's increasing more devices are using frequencies, from your phone NFC to smart devices, watches, AC controllers. All of this stuff requires frequencies and requires some sort of coordination to make sure that devices are not interfering among each other. And this is also important for the space sector, because without wireless communication right now, satellites cannot fly or cannot be controlled. It's important for space situational awareness, for ranging, or for radar or radio frequency monitoring from space. Frequencies are used to provide services such as broadcasting or IoT data moving, sensing frequencies from Earth atmosphere for weather forecasting, for instance. And therefore, you can see like the picture and how spectrum becomes quite important. It is quite important for the sector. So how satellite communication works, very briefly, frequencies are used to move data. Today we use digital communication, so usually we modulate transmissions to send series of zeros and ones. This data is moved by what we call carriers, which are characterized by a bandwidth, and a center frequency in hertz or megahertz or gigahertz. We have power of transmission, which identify how strong the emission is, and so you will have usually in decibel watt or dB watt or in watt measured. You have modulation, so you modulate the signal to make sure that the receivers can, the carrier can contain more information by modulating it. And then you have a polarization, which is the direction in which the transmission actually rotates. If you have a circular polarization, or we talk about linear one when the transmission is linear. The larger the bandwidth, of course, the more data you can move because you have more space to be able to modulate, and so more data that can be sent at once. But of course, the larger the bandwidth, also the larger the possibility, the bigger the possibility that you are overlapping with other transmissions, which means that you might need more coordination, or you might interfere with others more easily, or others might interfere with you more easily. So can we use any frequency? No, of course. There are just some frequency ranges that are available for space missions. This is because of physics, and so specific characteristics of Earth atmosphere make sure that you cannot sense water vibrating at frequencies different than what physics property gave to water. Due to the existing technologies or engineering, we cannot use today some of the frequencies because they might be too high, and therefore the signal might degrade quite quickly. There is a need also to physics with other applications, and there are some regulatory decisions that are actually basically dividing the frequencies available for communication in segments, and so they might be allocated to different kind of services. In space, we talk about, for instance, space operation, which is usually the one for telemetry and command. There is Earth exploration satellite service, which is all the services related to remote sensing, for instance. And so some services might get priority over others, and so you see how, also from a regulatory point of view, of course, not every frequency is available for all the services. This was just to give you an idea of the complexity of spectrum management. This is the United States frequency allocation table, and every single color, every single line is a specific bandwidth or segment of frequencies available for a specific service, a specific use. This is just in graphic. There is hundreds of pages long of worth of table that specify exactly what can be used, what cannot be used. And so if you want, you can find it also in version of table if you really want to go and dig into what device can use what kind of frequency. There is a larger PowerPoint. It can also work as a background or a nice painting somewhere. Sometimes I see people having it home. But yeah, so what are the frequencies for space? You have it from right to left, from the lower frequencies to the highest frequencies. We talk about VHF, or very high frequency. Usually it's for smaller satellites. It might be amateur, or might also be for satellites that provide services like, I think about Orbcom, that is moving small amount of data with ground terminals, and the satellite just sends them. Or you have ultra high frequency UHF, which is about around 400 megahertz. This is also still CubeSats kind of frequencies usually. You move in S-band, which can be used also both for providing services with mobile, like handheld devices, but this is, I think today, internationally is also the backbone of telemetry and command for small satellites. We have C-band, which is used mostly by geo satellites, which is either to provide services or to receive feeder links, which means the link that move data and then move telemetry and command for these satellites. X-band, usually it's mostly in downlink, used all today in downlink for, could be used for moving and downlinking payload data, in particular for Earth observation missions. The X-band is quite large. You have a bit larger bandwidth, which means you can move larger chunks of data, like we can talk about 50 gigahertz for a single SAR, a synthetic aperture radar image. It can also be used for passive sensing, for instance, for the SAR when it receives the data. The synthetic aperture radar satellite might transmit radio frequencies, and then it receive the bounce back, and that might be sensed in X-band, for instance. Then we have KU, KE, and KA bands, which are up to the 30 gigahertz and are used by different kind of services. I have the example here of the OneWeb satellite and then the Starlink satellite from SpaceX. And then we arrive at to V-band and beyond. Frequencies arrive today, regulated frequencies arrive today about 300 gigahertz in the US table frequency allocations. But of course, the higher the bandwidth, the harder the engineering challenge to be able to communicate from a satellite. And so we are still not seeing too many satellites utilizing these kind of frequencies. So now we arrive at spectrum management. Spectrum management is a process of regulating the use of frequencies. The idea is to have benefiting the most from frequencies, because physics cannot be changed. We have frequencies are a limited natural resource that can be shared, but needs to be regulated to make sure that there are no interferences that make unusable the frequencies themselves. So this coordination comes with a combination of administrative and technical procedures and requirements, and therefore we need spectrum management. It's that practice that comes between both regulatory processes, coordination processes that can be both formal and very informal. We divided, let's say, these processes in three main categories of tasks, which are the submission of a satellite finding, the frequency coordination per se, and then the protection of the frequencies that you have obtained. So this whole spectrum management framework internationally works with the International Telecommunication Union that works kind of as a broker. This is an agency of the UN, although it was created much earlier than the UN because it started as International Telegraphs Union. This works again as a broker, and every 4 years, more or less 4 years, there is a conference called World Radio Communication Conference, or WRC, which is the conference where all the ITU members, which are both governments, administrations, but also private entities and companies, come together to agree on how distribute frequencies, what kind of standards might be used, and everything is combined and updated into the radio regulations, which is the set of red books that you can see in the presentation. And basically this has a value of international treaty. Countries are supposed to comply with that. There is going to be a lot of exceptions. The radio regulation is full of footnotes with countries that are saying, we understand that this is how the rest of the world operates. We want to have an exception within our own territory. And the radio regulations, therefore, are the backbone of spectrum management. And from there, every country then might inspire their own framework and their own set of regulations for this matter. As I mentioned there, quickly two articles, Article 5 and Article 9, which are, I think, the most, to make it short, the one that might be more interesting to you to give a look at. Article 5, it's very long, and it's, again, the list of all the frequencies and the possibility of usage of the frequencies that are available, that are regulated and available for use. And then Article 9 provides instead a list of procedures for coordination internationally. It's a very well-oiled process, although sometimes it's slow for what Smallsats, for the pace of space activities that we are seeing today, because this process can last also for 7 years, the filing for a satellite at international level, but sometimes we see small satellite missions that are filing through the ITU 1 month before launch, and then they deorbit before the 7-year period is done, and so basically they never reach the satellite mission ends before they finish the regulatory process that they are supposed to go through. This is the international framework, from international to national. Every nation usually has a national administration, from the National Frequency Agency in France to the FCC and NTIA in the US, or the Independent Communication Authority of South Africa. There is the IMDA from Singapore, or Subtel is Subsecretariat Telecomunicaciones from Chile. Every national administration has usually a national table of frequency allocation, so designs a national table of frequency allocation inspired from the Article 5 of the radio regulations. They usually have a national procedure that leads to an ITU filing, and sometimes they might also decide to tie spectrum use and access to spectrum with other regulations. For instance, the case of the FCC that in the US that has requirements related to space sustainability to be able to obtain spectrum access. Then you might have heard, like, there is a discussion of, for instance, including a 5-year the orbit time after a mission is ending to make sure that orbits are kept clear. Okay, so the last 3 pillars, and then I will shut up. I was mentioning 3 different pillars of spectrum management is submission of a filing, So this is a screenshot from an ITU software that is called SpaceCap that it's utilized to submit ITU filings. Usually this process is quite straightforward. You just need to have a satellite link budget, make sure that you collect all the necessary satellite information, you include them in the software, you make sure that you're complying with national and international limits, you might want to start already national coordination with other operators, and this might also be a requirement from some countries and some administrations. And then you pack everything, you make sure that you submit it to your national administration that will report it to the ITU, and this will appear on the ITU website. If the administration accepts the filing, the ITU filing is submitted, and then basically coordination will start. This is a long process. You will start basically receiving comments and concern requests for coordination and concerns from other national administrations that will contact your own, and then your own national administration will forward you these comments for you to address. This can be requests of clarification of on your service, can be simply a statement, generic statement saying, we think your satellite will interfere with ours, or with our networks, not specifying what networks, not specifying at which frequencies those networks are working. And so there is a burden on the satellite operator to do some homework to make sure that you are not interfering with the existing networks. Of course, there is a possibility sometimes to have exceptions to filings, so you might not always be able or might not always want to stick to the frequencies that are located to the service you would like to provide to via your satellites. But if you stick as a satellite operator to the frequencies that are already allocated to your service, it's going to be easier for national and international coordination. This is of course not always possible because we are seeing so many new services and many concepts for satellite missions that are coming online, and not always they are fitting with services that are already existing, and we will also talk about this today later on. Finally, there is the protection. Once you finalize your filing and the coordination process, you are allocated frequencies and you have the right to ask for protection from interferences. And so this is an ongoing process, a never-ending process where you are supposed to monitor new filings, monitor new satellite mission, monitor new regulatory trends that might appear around the world that might prevent you from using the frequencies as they were allocated to you as a satellite operator. This is also a process during which you should make sure that you optimize your use of frequencies, meaning if you see that you're using less than what you have been allocated, you should make your administration aware of that so that they can use that spectrum for some other things. This is not always the case. It's a very good behavior, but not all the operators do that because, of course, being able to have spectrum as a reserve can always be useful, even just from a financial point of view, because investors might be happy to know that you have a big chunk of spectrum that you can use for future concepts, future missions within your own organization. So this was all for Spectrum Management 101. I hope it's been helpful. If you have some questions, we can talk about question and answer later on during the discussion. Now I would like to give the floor to Cssma members because we will go very quickly to present who is here today, what our organization are doing, why Spectrum is important to the members. Thank you. Okay, I think we can start alphabetically with astroscale, so I will give back the floor to Laura.
Perfect. Thank you, Matteo. So very briefly, Laura again. I am also the Regulatory Affairs Counsel for Astroscale US. And a little bit about Astroscale, we are a global company dedicated to servicing across all orbits. So you can see from the pictures here some of the services we offer, end-of-life services, which is actually currently being demonstrated by our ELSA-D mission in low Earth orbit, as well as active debris removal. This is really for removing large upper stages of rocket bodies, or really these items that can make a lot of debris. LEX, which is Life Extension Services, this is primarily right now for your geostationary satellites to extend their life after they've run out of their fixed amount of fuel. We can dock with them and then provide positioning and pointing as well as movement if they need. And then finally, in situ situational awareness, so inspection of certain items. And the issues that we really have with Spectrum is that when this architecture was first created, a lot of it is Earth-centric. So a lot of the allocations are focused on how do you provide a service back to Earth? How do I provide internet to someone? How do I take observations of the Earth? How do I do similar things? But for on-orbit operations, you really need some part of the spectrum that is enabling you to do space-to-space servicing. And right now that doesn't really exist. For example, this is also constrained by the rules. So for life extension, one of kind of the best practices is to potentially dock with your client satellite outside of the geostationary ring, so closer to graveyard. But if I am drifting behind the geostationary ring, you are not supposed to cause interference to other geostationary satellites that are in the ring. But it is very hard to conduct a docking with a client satellite if I have to keep turning on and off my connection to my satellite to not cause interference to people who are in the ring. And so that, along with just the fact that there currently isn't an identified place for these missions to place their spectrum use, really inhibits the kind of the burgeoning industry that is really set to explode. So that's the primary issue that we have related to our advancement of space sustainability being hindered by not having a spectrum allocation and then some of the way that the regulations are set up. Thank you.
All right, my name is Ryan Fielder, and I work for Hawkeye 360. Just a little brief overview about our mission. Hawkeye 360 operates a constellation of spacecraft in low Earth orbit that perform RF geolocation. Essentially, we have formation flying clusters of 3 spacecraft each, which can basically triangulate or trilaterate an RF signal emitted from the Earth and can provide data on the geolocation of that signal and where it's coming from. Thank you. The ultimate importance of spectrum when it comes to this is threefold. As Matteo said, spectrum is the basis of spacecraft operations, and that it goes for really any spacecraft and any mission operating in space. You have to think about the commanding and communication with the spacecraft for operations, and then for a lot of Earth observation type missions, you have to think about bringing that data that's collected and processed back to the ground and to the end user. It's a process that requires a lot of coordination and planning. These aren't necessarily trivial problems in order to figure out how to not interfere with other users and remain compliant with the limits set by national and international organizations. And so it's really a design process that needs to be considered from the beginning of mission design all the way through execution, and not something that you can kind of process when you're doing your filing paperwork, after you've designed your spacecraft. And then for Hawkeye 360 in particular, spectrum is our mission as well as our basis of operations. And so by passively sensing and geolocating RF spectrum, in order to do that effectively, it requires a knowledge of spectrum utilization across multiple domains and industries, not just in the space domain, but also how it's utilized on land, in the maritime domain, GNSS and GPS type signals, how all of that plays together in order to know kind of effectively what sort of RF signals and expectations to then process and deliver. So I think that about covers the spectrum needs for Hawkeye 360. I guess pass off to Kepler.
All right, thanks, Ryan. So hi, everyone. My name is Simon Mulgat-Lauren. I work with Kepler Communications. So brief overview of Kepler. We're in the business of data connectivity. So the main mission of Kepler is to increase the connectivity between your asset on the ground and your space asset. Essentially, Kepler is in the process of deploying a constellation of satellites and a network of Earth stations in order to ensure that you'll have an always-on and high bandwidth connectivity to any data that you generate on with your satellites in orbit. And effectively, Kepler's services span a bunch of different frequency bands and also the optical links. And so spectrum utilization is very intrinsic to our service on a day-to-day basis. Each different frequency band, as Matteo introduced, deals with different limitations and different operational restrictions. And so we have to adapt our service to each of these restrictions as they arise. But we're also trying to facilitate that for all of our customers. We want to ensure that anybody who connects to our service doesn't have to go through all those hoops themselves. So we try to hop through those hoops for the customers in order to increase the accessibility to space. Now, why does spectrum matter to Kepler in particular, and why is sustainability important to us? It's a matter of several different issues, but the first of which is interoperability. As we try to connect different satellites to our services, everybody's flying up there with different types of technologies, different types of hardware, and we really want to ensure that the use of spectrum is utilized efficiently. And so if you have similar technologies that are developed for different spacecraft, you can then reconnect to the same network eventually. And so we want to push forward a standardization of certain technologies and certain standards for the use of spectrum and development of hardware in order to ensure that different spacecraft will be able to connect to our servers. We're also concerned with the idea of spectrum not just as the subject of sustainability, but also as a tool for sustainability. So spectrum itself is a limited resource. We all know that, and we all want to try to use it as efficiently as possible. But there's also an avenue for spectrum itself and spectrum-related tools to be used to manage sustainability of space resources in general. So you can think of, for example, in the maritime sector, you have AIS, which are transponders which emit different locations of ships. We could use similar tools in space as well and connect your space assets through a network such as Kepler's in order to constantly know where your space asset is at all times and constantly be able to react to things like conjunction notices. So yeah, I look forward to discussing these issues with you and pass it on to the next person.
Thank you all. I'm Asia Barry. I'm working for Kineis on spectrum management. And I think now you're starting to understand as good as us what the spectrum is for. Regarding Kineis, we are a satellite operator that provides a global connectivity to our customers. We have been lucky to close our fundraising just before the COVID in 2020 of 100 million. That allows us for the past years and until next year, where we will be able to launch our constellation of 25 nanosatellites that will be dedicated to the Internet of Things. The idea of these constellations is coming from somewhere, as we are also the operator of Argos, which is kind of the grandpa of IoT. And we benefit from this 40 years experience of this legacy system for positioning and data collection system. The idea of Kineis is to renew this service by bringing robust and reliable connectivity worldwide and for all. And it will be dedicated to some focused markets that helps digitalize the industry, but also support environmental monitoring and protections. For example, we have a lot of application around wildlife monitoring today, and we are going to expand some application in the smart agriculture to support resilient agriculture and more efficient management of resources too. We also have some more industrial applications around network infrastructure and asset tracking. Obviously, we are relying on spectrum, and for us, we are targeting a real sustainable and spectrum management. The first aspect is that spectrum is a scarce resource. We have a very limited resource that we need to manage effectively and the more efficiently possible, and it has to be done by all and for all. Obviously, what has been discussed so far, it's highly competitive and complex access to this resource, which is combined with the orbit aspects. I dig up some numbers from the ITU database. Today we have around 2.5K active, let's say, networks, to simplify. And today has been filed, or yesterday, 10K plus satellite network, meaning that all the steps that has been described by Marco very smartly needs to be carried out with a huge volume of operators. Then the idea is to be very strict with ourselves, like trying to file when we need to file, and trying to file also what we need to operate. And trying to improve those practices will help to be more sustainable and be more efficient in terms of spectrum resources. The other topic about spectrum is that at the end we need to have licenses to operate, and this is also a complexity that all operators face, and in particular small operators, because at the end we have 193 countries in the world, and we should get all 193 licenses worldwide. The other aspect is that obviously the innovation is always moving, and there is new applications that are popping up every year. And I think this ISC will showcase some. And the idea is that even in spectrum, we need to put ourselves in a regular revision and review to allow both incumbent and new entrants to have a level playing field. And this is supported, obviously, in spectrum management through a World Radio Conference. And this is a 4-year cycle that every operator that deals with spectrum needs to follow up. Another aspect is that we are satellite connectivity, but obviously we are all connected through devices, mobile. The enterprises also rely more and more on mobile. This is a day-to-day activity, and that translates also in MSS requirement, because a satellite requirement, as whatever we do in cities, we should be able to do it in undercovered area, and satellite is the solution. Then we are facing a huge demand to access a specific spectrum that is called MSS in our words. And as an example, to give you some figures, today Space IoT has reached around 5 million subscribers worldwide in 2021, and we expect a growth of 1 billion by 2026, which is tomorrow. Obviously, those capacities in orbit are not infinite, and we need to think about the next generation. Then what about the spectrum for such services in 2030? Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Dan Adams. I lead KSAT's U.S. office. We're based in Denver. Thrilled to be back in Europe, closer to the home office in Norway. So KSAT is the global leader in space communication ground station services. So we have a variety of products serving a range of missions that many of you may be familiar with, as much of the industry is within our customer base. Of course, as a ground station operator, we rely extensively on the ability to maintain and provide spectrum authorization for transmit and receive services at jurisdictions around the world, which entails a significant amount of regulatory complexity and bureaucracy. And so from our perspective, the key thing for spectrum is patience and timelines, working with both legacy, very experienced, and new operators in the space domain to ensure that we can maintain a sustainable presence on the ground to achieve the scale that's needed as we're seeing growth specifically in LEO. So I think I'll just leave it at that and move on to the next to get the conversation going. Oh, nope, back to Mateo.
Okay, hi again. Now with my LeafSpace hat, because on my day-to-day job of work at LeafSpace as a regulatory affairs specialist, LeafSpace, it's also a ground segment service provider. We've been founded in 2014. We are about 30 people right now. We have about 17 ground stations. We are finishing one commissioning these days. But probably KSAT does one every 2 or 3 days, so can't compare with that. We've worked with Smallsats around the world. We have all the array of satellites, missions that we have been supporting, from Earth observation to orbital transfer vehicles to direct-to-phone connectivity. We've been seeing quite a lot of different missions. And the space and why we think spectrum is important. Our business is market-driven, meaning that we are not trying to impose frequencies on satellite operators. We try to adapt on what they need to operate at, which means that what is important for us, having multiple ground stations around the world, it's the harmonization of the spectrum regulations around the world. Because personally, every time there is a new mission, I have to obtain 20 different authorizations across different countries, and each has its own process, its own timelines, its own fees. And so making sure that spectrum, or the same bands of spectrum, are actually available across the world, and that the process gets similar across different countries, and the best practices are shared among different regulators, make our job easier, but also on the satellite side, it makes life easier for satellite operators. Okay, so now Secure World Foundation.
Hi, thank you, Matteo. Hi, everybody. My name is Crystal Azelton, and I am the Director of Space Application Programs at the Secure World Foundation. I'm going to take a different direction than some of the previous speakers because I don't operate satellites, but I still care about spectrum. And I think there are probably a lot of people in this room who are, and it's a very full room, interested in spectrum. So I have a feeling a lot of you are very familiar with it. But there are also some people who are probably like, this is something I need to learn about and care about, but I don't actually attend ITU things. So I'm in your camp, and that's kind of what I'm going to speak to. So Secure World Foundation is a US-based nonprofit whose mission is entirely focused on space sustainability. So we're looking at all of the different issues, of which many of them are kind of come to mind immediately, like orbital debris is a big topic for us. Space security and anti-satellite testing is a big topic for us. International law. But a lot of people get surprised when spectrum gets on that list, because what we want to do is we want to make sure that we can continue to receive benefits from space activities in the long term. So that means ensuring that we have a safe, secure, peaceful, and usable space environment from tomorrow all the way to the foreseeable future. That's what we want to support, right? But spectrum is a really important part of that, and it's one that I think is hard for a lot of people. Let me see, this we go. So yeah, again, these are some of the issues we work on, but spectrum is a sustainable issue because it is a resource, and as we have been hearing from all of the previous speakers, it is not infinite. They have done a much better job of highlighting some of the issues within the spectrum community and the concerns moving forward. What I want to highlight is that we all need to be involved in this. If you're a spectrum expert and you understand all of the complex technical issues around 24 gigahertz, congratulations, that's great. To you, I would encourage you to think broader. I think when we talk about policy, spectrum can kind of get lost in the weeds because, as one of the previous speakers said, it is a long process. You have to understand the timelines. You have to understand how the institutions work, and that's quite difficult for newer entrants into the space world, which is why we have an organization like Cssma, which is great. But if you're already in that world, sometimes we also have to take a step back and remember that it's not always about the detailed negotiations. It's not always about the long timelines. It's also about having larger community conversations around spectrum to decide and understand what as a community our priorities and our needs are. And if you're someone who hears the word spectrum and your eyes glaze over, which is a lot of people, just to be honest with you, that needs to stop. In the sustainability world, all of us who are interested in these things need to understand that if we want to have a sustainable future, we have to address all of the challenges. And as we've seen today, there are a lot of those in the spectrum world as well. You know, from competition to new technologies that we're developing ourselves, all of those things need to happen. And the current systems that we have to decide spectrum do a really good job of dividing spectrum into little pieces and allocating them over very good timelines. But they're not always the best place to have large-scale policy contributions, to understand how technology is evolving, and to come up with a plan for addressing those things. And so that's what I want to encourage everyone to think of today, and to take an interest in this as a broader policy issue in addition to figuring out exactly what your company or organization spectrum needs might be. Both very important, but not always the same thing. So that's kind of what I wanted to say for today. I think, oh, there we go.
Okay. All right, so the QR code there will bring you to Slido where you can pick which topic you would like to talk for the next 30 minutes. In the meantime, we have a last addition from Swedish Space Corporation. I'm going to leave the floor.
Thank you, Matteo. So I don't have any slides, so I'll just talk a little bit about, so I'm Sam Peterson. I'm from Swedish Space Corporation. And like Dan and like Matteo, we are a global ground segment operator, and we do everything from LEO to GEO and lunar. As of today, we're the first and still the only lunar communications provider around, but that's not going to last. With all the excitement to lunar, there'll be a lot of new people going that way. But as the interest in the room is in spectrum management, and they've already stolen my thunder about how spectrum management works for us global ground operators, I just wanted to kind of maybe give a little bit of perspective to people that don't think they know as much about spectrum, but probably have experienced what we're concerned about with spectrum more than they probably thought they have. So, if you're driving and you listen to your radio stations and you're driving in between a couple of cities, you experience the problem that we experience with our satellites when, all of a sudden your radio station starts to go out and you hear another radio station bleeding in. And then you go over a hill and you hear your radio station again. And then you go down that hill and you hear the other radio station. And that's exactly what happens with satellites. But with all the satellites that are going up, you're talking about thousands of satellites that can cause interference for each other. And they're all in different orbits. So Laura was talking earlier about when satellites cross the geoplane, but there's more than that. There's highly elliptical orbits, and there's different levels of low Earth orbit, and all of them cross each other's paths and have the potential to cause that interference. And the further away you get, the weaker those signals are when they reach Earth. So you're more susceptible to crossing the paths of satellites that are closer to Earth and have more powerful signals. So maybe that gives a little bit more perspective in the room, and we'll open up for questions and have a nice discussion now.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you to all the Cssma members that shared the organization needs and why they think spectrum is important. I'm seeing here on Slido, and sorry, we are not going to show the replies, but I think you can see it from your own devices. Right now, spectrum regulation and interactions with sustainable space regulations are actually on the lead. So I will give you a few seconds more if you want to vote something different, otherwise we can probably already start. If you have questions, if you want to intervene, I don't know if the mics here are enabled, but please feel free to come here if you want to ask questions. So I would start to ask our Cssma members over here. I mentioned briefly before that there is sometimes national administration intertwine spectrum access with other kind of regulations and requirements, one of which is space sustainability. We've seen it with FCC, we are seeing it more informally with other national administrations. I would like to start a bit the debate on this issue. It's something that maybe, I don't know if any of you, or Laura, for instance, you are more familiar with US framework, if you want to share a bit of the FCC and what FCC asks for space sustainability, what FCC actually, if FCC has the agency to do that. It's Pandora box we are opening right now. And then we can talk also, if the audience wants to intervene, we invite you to do so. If you have questions, please stop us. Yeah, happy to kickstart this.
Yeah, happy to talk briefly. And yeah, like Matteo said, please feel free to come up to the floor mics, or even if you just want to raise your hand old school style, we can also walk this mic around the floor. But so in the US at least, the Federal Communications Commission, which is the commercial administrator of spectrum in the US, has interpreted their statutory authority to regulate radio frequency, but also includes the phrase in the public good, to put regulations of orbital debris in relations to satellite under their purview. So they have passed orbital debris mitigation guidelines. I think they first considered it in 2003 with a first rulemaking in 2004. And there is currently some open issues on that, like how you would calculate risk for mega constellations And they just released a draft order that they're considering at their September open meeting in a couple of weeks of whether the current rule that you have to deorbit a satellite at the end of its mission in 25 years should be decreased to 5 years. And there are, yeah, as Matteo hinted at, some varying schools of thought on whether or not it is the proper place to put oversight of orbital debris in relation to spectrum, or whether orbital debris is something that should fall to another agency or be clarified as a congressional intent for someone to actually have oversight of it. And I know this issue has also come up in relation to the ITU, with some people wondering whether or not to have kind of global standards around orbital debris. That would be another body in which there's a possibility potentially of having some type of orbital debris standard there related to spectrum. So that's kind of the US side. I don't know if anybody wants to talk, has questions, hand raises. Yep. And if you just want to introduce yourself as well first.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Cssma, for this session. My name is Chen Lu. I'm from ITU. Some of you may have already met me before in terms of when you do your filings for your small satellite projects. So before I move on to talking about this topic, maybe I just would like to respond to some of the issues that you mentioned during the various presentation. One is on in-orbit servicing. Astroscale was talking about it. This issue is actually currently being discussed in Geneva at this moment. So this is being taken care of, okay? And IoT, spectrum for IoT. This is also in the agenda of the WRC, the next WRC, in the sense of narrowband MSS. So these are all issues that's being discussed. So this goes to show that ITU is actually an organization that is evolving, always trying to take into consideration the needs of the industry. Now, in terms of space sustainability and the FCC's new rule, this is something that perhaps I would not like to give my opinion on it, in the sense that ITU, we are always neutral, we are open to all this. However, I would like to highlight that we have the recommendation that has existed since a long time for the geostationary satellite orbit, whereby at the end of the lifetime, they are supposed to deorbit to graveyard orbit. Okay, that is not the best solution, but it is in place. It has been effective for many years. So if so, we are at the hands of member states. If member states believe that ITU is effective in implementing such measures, perhaps member states can use ITU as a forum to implement measures like this. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have a response to that or other thoughts? Yep.
First of all, thank you. Indeed, the ITU is a broker, so it depends on the will of member states to bring up topics or not. So going back to space sustainability, and I can stand probably, what I've seen from my experience is that often it's, if it's not formal, there might be informal requirements from regulators around the world. Some example might be some countries that might ask you to have an end-of-life disposal plan, or have verified whether your satellites will create damages, or the risk of creating damages while re-entering orbit. And so this is not formal, it's not written in this country regulation, but they might ask satellite operators still to do this. Of course, it's not an optimal solution because it's not written in law, which means that it's up to the officers asking for these kind of things to actually implement some space sustainability requirements. And so it's not always ideal because, of course, if that officer retires or if there leaves, then maybe the space sustainability requirement might actually be dropped by that regulator's office. I don't know, Crystal, if you also want to share.
Yeah, I mean, I would take that back even another step, because I agree with you. The informal nature of the interaction between spectrum licensing and space sustainability requirements, particularly around debris, but there are other examples. I would question whether that's even the right way forward at all. Right now, it's often in many countries, it's a fallback position because it's a pinch point for when an operator or someone else has to interact with the government, and therefore there's an opportunity to have regulation. But is it the correct one? I mean, this is something that's being debated in the United States right now and around the world, and as Matteo pointed out, it's often very inconsistent and informal, but I think we can all agree that many of the things being done in this way are incredibly important. And so it's not a matter of saying either or, it's a matter of creating the correct pathways in every country to both address your actual spectrum needs, but also to take into account space sustainability requirements. And I will say that when you actually create a list of regulators around the world, it's really inconsistent where even spectrum regulation lives, yet alone who's doing which pieces of it. If you try to create like who is responsible country by country for different issues, you get very, very different answers. And that's not going to change to a certain extent. But the idea that technology and industry is outpacing the government's ability to intake and address appropriately. And it's not necessarily to overregulate. We're just saying that filtering system for having these rules and guidelines in place and then implementing them country by country is kind of messy right now. And as a community, I think that's something that we have to be aware of and be advocating to change, that's not an efficient way to manage our needs either for spectrum or for these other areas. So the fact that they kind of coexist right now is a bit of a legacy of that and launch regulation are really the two places where government has traditionally been involved. And so I would say, is that what we want going forward? Is that a convenient, efficient, effective way for industry to interact with government around all of these topics? So that would be my comments for right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I will reinforce this point because what we learned about spectrum management is that harmonization was one of the key things for the successful launch of many applications. And if we translate that to space debris mitigations, the fact that many regulations could pop up from a country due to national vision about what to do becomes to be complicated if it's put as a strong regulation in one country and strongest in another. It will be the competition to the biggest and strongest regulation. I think sharing best practices could be also a first step that should be done as much as possible because we are all talking together in small forum. ITU is a good forum also where best practices are shared. And my take on that is that we should avoid this complexity being like spread for each topics and trying to share best practice, involve the industry, and then see if a regulation is needed and on worldwide basis. But at least on a worldwide basis would be the best.
Okay, I think we can move to another topic. Just to wrap this up, I wanted to mention, as we've been talking also about best practices, I think last week SpaceX, Iridium, and OneWeb and the IAA just issued a very interesting documents with guidelines and best practices for space safety and operations of space in safety. So I invite you also to go and look at that document because it's quite interesting to see how commercial operators are approaching, and large commercial operators are approaching these issues. So from the poll, I see that optical communication is also another one that the audience is interested in, to make sure everyone knows what we are talking about. In the last 3-4 years, some companies have emerged proposing commercial terminals for optical communication, which doesn't use radio waves, but uses waves that are way higher in terms of frequency, which allows for larger bandwidth of use, so more data can be moved more easily. This is a hard technology to work with because it's more precise, it's harder to interfere with because it's light moving, but at the same time, we are not there yet commercially because it's also quite to implement from an engineering point of view. But we are getting there. And so as we are getting there, it's important to start considering legal and regulatory aspect of it and the implications for radio frequency communication. We will have only optical satellites. We will have hybrid optical radio frequency satellites. Right now, this technology is used primarily for space-to-space communication, which avoids satellites interfering with each other if they are transmitting radio frequencies in orbit. And so I would like now to open the floor and see if any of you has comments on these, questions on this, or probably our members. I think some of us is working already with optical, both in space and in the ground.
Thanks, Matteo. If there's any questions on optical links, I'll just dive into it a little bit. As Matteo alluded to, the optical links are not currently regulated by the ITU. It falls outside of that scope. And Kepler particularly sees it as an avenue for offloading a lot of the encumbrances that are in the RF bands that are regulated by the ITU, because you essentially have this link that does not cause interference in the same sense that RF links in the microwave spectrum do, and has a huge capacity for transmitting tons of data. Where I think there's a role for regulation, and maybe there's a current lack, is less so in terms of international bodies like the ITU coming in and imposing things on member states, for example, but more so in terms of industry or academic-led standardization of the technologies that are used for optical links. There is currently a lack of standardization of the way that optical links are implemented across the board, and it causes problems in terms of interoperability between these different systems and the potential for links that could be done between two different satellite systems entirely. So I think that there's a great potential here for developers of optical terminals and users of optical terminals to kind of get together and ensure that the development is done in such a way that it can be standardized and it can be interoperable going forward in order to frame the overall use of optical links in the future. If there's any comments beyond that, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So KSAT is a ground station service provider. We see optical as an alternate solution, but certainly not separate from RF, right? So from the space side, in which the ISL, in-space optical link, may make more sense as the only solution to move data in space, but you're always going to need the RF link to ground, whether it's TT&C or payload data. But the really important thing relative to that is, as you say, I think, the standardization. Because without standardization, without consistency, we're going to end up maybe decades from a truly operational optical ground network as well as space network. Nonetheless, we can't ignore the RF, right? Whether it's Ka band or dual pole X band or some other way to move high bandwidth communication links, RF is essential. Yeah.
I wanted to add to that from a space operator perspective. I think hybrid solution is a great way to put it as a path forward. Both optical and RF are not without their own challenges and benefits. For example, optical has the opportunity to push a lot more data, over the transmitter than some of the lower frequency RF bands. But currently it poses a significant engineering problem, especially to small spacecraft operators, in that optical systems tend to be a lot more power hungry, and there's a much higher fidelity pointing requirement to do with closing a link on an optical terminal. The same thing that makes optical great and reduces interference, in that it's point-to-point communication, means that you have to have very precise pointing. And so this debate, or not even debate, but this aspect of starting to incorporate optical systems into spacecraft in LEO and other regimes is kind of, to my point earlier, that goes all the way back to a design challenge as well as just a regulatory challenge. You need to take these systems into thought from the very beginning and think about what your spacecraft needs to look like to be able to accommodate these new technologies and these new links that can really benefit the space communications.
Matteo saw a hand? No? Yes, okay. Running this way.
Hi there, I'm Andy Vick from Rail Space in the UK. I'm actually developing quantum communication systems in the optical. Now, these are visible and near infrared instead of the longer wavelengths that the traditional stuff uses. And so I do have extra requirements on what I'm doing. I have to get safety sign-off from the CAA to actually use these things. And although we all hope we'll move to longer wavelengths in the future for QKD, there's going to be a lot of projects over the next 5 to 10 years using those 800, 900 nanometers, which are not necessarily eye safe. So we've got to fold in that to everything else. And I'd just like that opportunity to make a statement here. I already have to deal with lots of different people for lots of different sign-offs. And if people are going to add the space debris question into radio frequency and that gets added to eye safety through CAA, I'd please find some way of persuading an authority to take charge of this and start to do it at an international level, because I can't deal with everybody in the world. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that raises a good point that we were discussing earlier. There's just a lot of bodies that have influence in this sphere. And I think one for optical that I've actually wondered about and that I had a question about is, I know there's a question whether in the US legally if the FCC could actually regulate optical spectrum, because it is not technically a radio frequency. And part of the regulation for a lot of spectrum is that focus on efficiency, so making sure that multiple users that are in that same band can continue to use it. And I was told at one point, I asked the question, so if two lasers cross in space, what happens? And someone told me that nothing happens, and that like they're fine, there's no loss of data or anything. And I was wondering if anyone here can confirm that or talk further on kind of that, whether there's a need to regulate for efficiency or whether they won't actually interfere with one another. Haha.
Okay, I can tell you that one. So if you cross two laser beams in space and you were sitting several planetary distances away, you'd see a very nice very nice diffraction pattern. But apart from that, no, you won't lose any power. The beams are so condensed anyway, even from, on my systems, from Earth up to space, the beam can be reduced down to a few hundred meters in width, and all of the power's in that. So no, there's no interference between them.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Does anybody else have thoughts on optical or anything else shared so far? Right back over here to Matteo.
Yeah, so I think this is going to be interesting from a regulatory point of view, if you like regulations, I guess. It's also how this will be approached by aviation industry and the aviation regulators around the world, because I spoke with some of them, and when they hear lasers from space, they kind of freak out because they don't know what is the impact on aviation, on the eyesight of pilots. There are regulations, for instance, to not be able to use point-to-point lasers close to airports because it could be dangerous, it could distract pilots during landing or lift off. And so a lot of legwork that we will probably have to do when we want to introduce optical on a more regular basis is actually making sure that, and here I'm talking about space to Earth optical, or Earth to space optical maybe in the future, is going to show that this is harmless. There might be some lasers or optical communication that are using dangerous wavelengths, and therefore maybe we should avoid trying to have standards that implement that wavelength, because that would require then a serious coordination with aviation airlines and aviation industry for every single terminal that you will be deploying around the world, and that's not quite ideal. Otherwise, often when we talk about optical, we talk about things that can operate effectively only during the night, because they might be less powerful than solar rays, and so it's going to be interesting how this pan out, because we will have probably to bring into the discussion of regulations additional administrations, and probably on the ground segment side of things, we will have to be creative on how to better coordinate with aviations. I don't know, integrating like ways to track flights and make sure that we are not receiving as flight is flying over the ground terminal. So it's going to be quite interesting also as a challenge from an engineering and site management point of view, and so it's important that this discussion is going on right now today. Does someone have any questions or comments on this? Yes, I see something over there.
So I know there's a lot of progress at the moment with hybrid RF optical ground stations. do you think that that's going to be the future, where there's a lot of kind of hybrid systems that become increasingly good and reduce swap requirements? Or will there be disparate specialized bearers that kind of pass off between each other, or a single system that has a highly optimized control system that can differentiate and optimize its path, given cloud cover, that kind of stuff? Thank you.
Thank you.
So the technologies are different. So you can have a spacecraft that has both, and you can have ground stations that have both, but your telescope that does your optical is going to be a separate system from your RF parabolic antenna, or your, how we're designed antenna for your RF is. It's a different technology. But, speaking to, having to have standards, that's what's, limiting, the use of it, I would say, because just about all of us ground segment providers are doing some testing with it. We have a station or a couple of stations maybe that are doing something, but to build tens of stations or hundreds of stations when there's no agreement on the standard, Dan's company might build VHS and I might build Betamax, and I would hate to be the one to build Betamax all over the world and then have everybody decide that they want to use VHS next year. So that's what's stopping the widespread adoption of optical, I would say, because on the space segment side, they don't have a standard that they can put on that they know that there's going to be ground segment providers that would use it. And on the ground segment side, there's a reluctance to invest in something that could be obsolete or could just go a different direction. And now you've sunk a lot of investment in something that you can't use.
So we have just a couple of minutes left, so we can wrap up. I don't know if there is any final question you might have. I see none. Yeah, so one point here.
Sorry, I just want to sneak in one final point here, and it kind of touches upon several of the topics that we spoke to before. And I think a key thing that we need to be mindful of as a space community in general, both as regulators and users of space services or providers of space services, is ensuring that any standards or regulation that gets put through doesn't lead to a siloing of technologies. You want to ensure that the technologies are there to serve the ultimate purpose that they're trying to serve, right? Not that the regulations are forcing the particular use of one particular technology. So opening up the availability for optical links, for RF links, and ensuring that they're being used for their best purpose is to the benefit of everybody, as opposed to saying, as a regulator, I'm imposing this particular RF band on you, or imposing this particular optical type technology on you. And tying back to kind of the orbital debris questions we were talking to earlier, the issues with conflating sometimes the management of spectrum and the management of orbital assets can lead to limiting certain technologies that people want to implement. It can lead to people who want to easily access space, don't necessarily have the money to implement very refined or very costly propulsion systems, for example. So ensuring that you are not imposing regulation and ensuring they're not imposing standards that limit those technologies, but open up the playing field instead and allow people to test different technologies while also aiming for interoperability between different operators is, I think, the ultimate goal here.
There are some points there was before.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm Véronique Claude from the ITU and a colleague of Schweinscherm. I wanted to say to everybody that to continue this discussion and maybe to feed more input for this discussion, we are presenting a paper tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m. about space sustainability, synergy, and ITU role today and tomorrow. So it may be of interest to continue this discussion tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Marulena Hoffmann. I'm from the University of Luxembourg. And I am teaching both ITU law and space law. And the ITU system of spectrum coordination has more than 100 successful years of experience. And I wonder whether you think that this system would be transferable also in the other areas of space activities, like, for instance, the coordination of safety zones by space mining.
That's a good question. I think you've stumped the people up here. Any audience replies to that? I know we have some ITU people, some people with experience. He volunteered.
That is definitely not an easy question, and I'm not going to be able to answer to that directly, but I can say that the ITU system, as you have said, it has been successful over 100 years, and today it is actually very successful in meeting the spectrum needs and of the industry. So specific requirements like that will require member states to bring this to the ITU. So if member states believe that there is a need, and they would bring this up to the ITU, because this is quite a departure from spectrum. So this would need the highest level of authorization, which will be the Planning Potentiality Conference. So it's going to be difficult. It is not impossible, but the Planning Board is going to be meeting very soon, in 1 week's time. And the next one will be in four years' time. So if member states believe that there is a need, they could prepare for it in the next planning board in 4 years' time, and to see if ITU can start to look at this other role. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think with that, we are out of time for our session. So I would just note briefly that the new QR question now is just if you want to stay in contact with us about kind of this conversation or have any questions for us or any comments, if you just want to leave your name or email, we'll reach out to you. So thank you all for joining. Thank you all for participating. I would say this was a successful event. Greatly enjoyed it. And yeah, I hope you all learned something, had some new thoughts. And we'll see you around the conference.
Thank you all. Again, we will all be here, I guess, outside of the room, but also throughout the conference. So happy to talk about these matters. I think we all like to talk about this forever. So thank you again for coming. Thank you all. That's nice.
Hi, Mateo. You're from
Leaf
Space.
Yes.
A lawyer. So. I know. But he said he's not an engineer.
I'm not an engineer, not a lawyer.
But you're working for it. Okay, oh, that's a typical lawyer.
But
I'm a practitioner.
Yeah.
But he was explaining all the spectrums and frequencies and so at the beginning. Yeah, well.
I don't know. I hope I didn't say any trouble.
I'm sure you did well. So what was the...
Thank you, Dan.
I gotta run off for you.
Okay, see you.
What was the session?
Yeah, I hope it was informative. I wanted to have more like outreach kind of things. Hi, Crystal. Thank you again. See you around.
So what does leaf space do?
Ground segment.
Ground segment?
Yes. So we have antennas around the world, and we offer small sat operators.
But do you develop antennas or?
We started, and then we realized it was a bad idea. So we buy off the shelf, and then we deploy and we integrate them in our network.
Oh, maybe you should stop. Have a kind of nomadic antenna, that you can bring to site.
Okay.
And
like it's a mobile, or can
it's not really mobile. It sits on 2 containers, but it needs like 1 day to deploy.
Okay.
But it's like 5-meter dish and SX band, KA, KU.
Do you have a card? I think this afternoon our VP for infrastructure is coming here, and they might be because we're also tracking launch vehicles, and so being able to deploy in 1 day might be useful.
But they are tracking because we are actually discussing now with some Scottish people to equip the launch site.
Is it Luxembourg?
But there are many actually.
Yeah, it's true. Well, thank you, Thomas.
Thanks. I will send you. Okay, I will send you the description of the ground station if you want.
Yeah.
Who in your team would be adequate to ask for some price estimations?
About what? dedicated stations.
Yeah.
Solivki. Well, Tommaso is here. I think he might be.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Thank you. I already introduced myself. Thank you, thank you.
Excuse me, may I take your...
Do
1, 2.
an introduction, right? Like speak for 3 minutes, and then because the panel is really confusing.
Yeah, no, but who is moderating? Are you moderating?
I think he is more.
They could be a watcher because of their,
Okay.
you know. So I want to support them with having like the first space symposium about this constellation, the planet constellation. For the time being, it's Smallsats that they're trying to build. But this is activities that can fall within the silos of capacity building, of like all education, a lot of different things. So I most definitely, if this is going to happen, I would like to have the graduations present and at least like being a partner of this process, because I believe that is another country that is like, willing to join the space family. Well, I guess we know you, but exactly. Give But me your card. Unfortunately, I don't have a card. We'll, but we'll I just can, reach out to Marcus and find out. Yes, exactly. Maybe this is what I will just do, and at least we are in contact. Alison, you said.
Allison, I-S-O-N.
I have
Arrayes, A-R-E. N.
Yeah, but I think it's like around
Then A-R-E.
conversations that everyone.
No,
I think they asked us just to make a quick intro, each of us who is doing what and what are the messages towards the emerging markets, and then to open the conversation more. Maybe to be
Déjà,
here,
kind of wish I
if
spoke
we don't
Italian.
talk just to each other,
Can you speak Italian? No,
but
not at all. I can
turn to everyone else in the auditorium to ask them.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seat. We are about to start a special session. Madame et Monsieur, bienvenue. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome at our next special session of the 2022 ISC called Building Bridges Between the Established and Emerging Space Industry. The key word for this year ISC is Space for All. And I believe that also the industry should belong to all countries and to all should collaborate with each other. And today we have great speakers from international organizations and also the industries to talk how to do our best in terms of developing the emerging countries and also, and vice versa, developing the innovation in already established industries. So let me start with introducing our speakers, main speakers today. First, I would like to introduce the Alison Ayres-Wochel from the UN OSA. Please. The Annalisa Donati from the URISI. Mrs. Veronica La Regina from Nanorax, representing the industry. Then I will move to that table, so we will have a speaker sitting at the two tables. So Mr. Jonathan Hung from the Singapore Space and Technology Limited. Mr. Matias Campos from Astral into Space Technologies Ecuador. Mr. Raicho Raichev from Endurosat Bulgaria. Mr. Temidayo Oniuson from Space Africa. And last but not least, the organizers of this special session. First, Mr. Michal Brichta from the Slovak Space Office. and myself, Daniel Sagat, also from the Slovak Space Office, and I will be taking charge of the moderating this session. We have prepared a survey that will accompany us during the whole session. This survey was filled by all our speakers and will be a sort of anchoring point to kick off the main points of discussion, such as the definition of the emerging countries, the main source of the potential, the main challenges that those emerging countries are challenging, the goals for strategy that governments should apply, the tools for developing space ecosystem, and the last but not least, the collaboration opportunities where they should be. Let me tell a few words about the organization of today's session. So we will start with introductory pitches of each speaker presenting their organization, especially what does their organization is doing in terms of helping bridging the emerging ecosystem with already established. And we will give a lot of opportunities for you to talk. So please bear in mind that after each round of the survey, we will, showing the survey results, we'll give you an opportunity to make some comments. So rather questions, you can think of the commenting the results that you will see after the, from the survey. Please limit your answers to maximum 1 minute because we have something more than 1 hour and there is a lot to discuss. So ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to open discussion with the introductory pitches from our speakers. So let me start with Alison from the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. The word is yours.
Hi, thank you very much. Good morning. So I'm from UNUSA, United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs. Can everyone raise their hand if you know what UNUSA is? Okay, so about half. So the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs was an office that was created in 1958 to support the development or the establishment of the Committee for the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And I'm sure you know COPUOS. It's responsible for helping to develop the 5 outer space treaties and all the treaties supporting, including rescue and return of astronauts, the register of objects launched into outer space, etc. But what most people don't know is that we have 2 mandates. One is the COPUOS Secretariat, and then we are a secretariat for a number of other organizations and entities, but we also have a capacity building mandate. And with that, we do partnerships, and we partner with industry. That's something we want to grow. And I'm actually here in listening mode too, because I really want to hear from you, your ideas about how we can do that better and do more of it. For the moment, we have 4 industry partnerships. We have 13 with government. We have 64 with universities. We have 81 MOUs. So it's something that we take very seriously. As you know, the 17th UN Sustainable Development Goal is partnerships. And we want to live that. We want to grow it. We really want UNUSA to be part of Space 2.0 and be relevant for emerging spacefaring nations. I really urge you to go to our booth, A26. Sorry, this is my ending pitch, but I'm going to say it early. I'm going to say it at the end too. Booth A26, and please check us out on the web and our Facebook page and Twitter, because we have all of our projects. We just launched it today with very easy to understand examples of what we're doing. And again, I really want to hear your suggestions about what we can do better in terms of engaging with industry.
Okay, so hello, good morning everybody, and thank you again to the Slovakia Space Office for organizing this session today. My name is Annalisa Donati, and as you heard, I'm the Secretary General of URISI. URISI is actually like an association of a space agency. We gathered at the moment 21 space agencies across Europe and also beyond, because we have a European, let's say, born base of countries, but we look way forward, and it's not necessarily European. So we include, for instance, Morocco and the Turkish Space Agency on top of the European Space Agency and the major space agencies across Europe. And what we do can be encapsulated basically in 3 main pillars, one being the awareness raising campaign. So what we do, we work on the satellite application and the benefit for society. So our motto is bridging the gap between space and society. And with this, we
do awareness raising campaigns with our members, but also collectively. So we try to gather the priorities of the different space agencies that are part of our network. We translated it into action lines for this kind of campaign. We do work a lot on user need analysis, so we really go next to the users. We try to understand which are the challenges in the uptake of satellite-based application and what can be done indeed to overcome those challenges. So we act somehow as a matchmaker between service providers, final users, but also we do work on the acceleration of the use of space. And eventually the last pillar is about the feedback. So it's, we bring back to the space agencies the feedback from the users, from the service providers. So what can be done in terms of policy development to smooth the path of the uptake of those applications. When it comes to emerging space nations, so what we do is that we provide to emerging countries, but also to established countries, the possibility to interact, the possibility to have a platform where to exchange not only ideas and programs and projects, but also really best practices in terms of governance development, in terms of boosting of startup ecosystem. So it's really what we're doing is building a community, and we want this community to be freely exposed to one another way of doing space. So here we are at ESA booth, because ESA is our funding member and funding father, so we are hosted by them, and I would welcome everybody. We have some publication for maritime topic. We work a lot on different domains, so come join us and we will welcome you and talk about how to accelerate the use of space. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Michael, to invite me to this panel. Really exciting. So I am leading Nanorax Europe, and here in the audience we have also the Nanorax CEO, Amela Wilson. So please approach her during the networking. I think the question I would like to address is not who knows about Nanorax, but who doesn't know about Nanorax. Please raise your hand. So I need to understand if I have to do a big job. You don't know. Okay. If you don't know, raise your hand. No one raised the hand. So I don't take too much time. We have been established as a brand more than 10 years ago, and we find actually that we have a role as a catalyst to unlock the access to space for everyone. So we go a little bit more beyond the motto of this IAC, that is space for all. It's actually for everyone, giving a path for everyone. Every single, each of you can have a path to go up to space. And to give you some demonstration, besides that everyone knows about who is Nanorax, we end up to give the opportunity to company who wants to prove their technology for the first time in space. So here in the panelist member, we have Endurosat with the ratio that they send up the CubeSat, their first CubeSat up to space through Nanorax. So we end up to work with the one, I mean, they are trying to access and participate space for the first one. So saying that, I leave the floor to the other. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, once again. It's great to see so packed hall today here. Thank you, first of all, to IAF partners and CNES for organizing this IAC. We're happy that we could hold this special session here today. I got inspired by my predecessing speakers, so I will ask a question. Who has heard before about Slovak Space Office? Not that many hands, but yes, it's good. We like it, and we'll be getting this better. So this is not our first event that we are organizing on the topic of emerging space ecosystem and emerging space countries. Along with our national flagship event, Emerging Space, that we organize biannually now, we already brought this topic to several interesting platforms, including United Nations COPWAS, including World Expo in Dubai last year, and now the IAC. And the reason why we are trying to have this topic to be talked more about is two particular. One is that we find this very important when it comes to democratization of space. And helping to utilize the full potential of the space community globally, which can be only achieved if we can really include all regions, if we can include larger and also smaller countries, etc. And secondly, we are also going through this process basically right now. Even though Slovakia is not new to space, we've had R&D experience dating back to 1970s, only working on scientific payloads. But only now, recent years, we are beginning to work on systematically work on developing of this space ecosystem. So we like to share with others what we have learned on this path, and we also like to learn from others how to do it even better. So Slovak Space Office, just a few of you heard about it, that's perfectly fine. We've been just founded in May last year, so that's still just a short time, and we'll be doing our best that when we organize this session next year, there will be all the hands in the room going up. So we are working about 1 year now, but the SARIO, our parent organization, a governmental organization under Ministry of Economy, has been working in space since 2019. And there has been a truly interesting journey since then, because we managed over this time to consolidate and grow significantly the space ecosystem in Slovakia, establish the Slovak Space Office with a range of interesting tools to support the sector development and international collaboration, including as a very important part the bridging with the more experienced ones and with larger ones in Europe and outside, and also bringing Slovakia to the associate membership in European Space Agency, which is right now happening this year, and we are truly excited about it. So today, bridging is a really crucial part of our work. Thank you, and I'm looking really forward to the thoughts from all of you.
Hi everybody, thank you again for having me here. Jonathan from the Singapore Space and Technology Limited, the Singapore acronym SSTL, not the UK one to be confused. So we help to coordinate and support a lot of Singapore's space activities. We don't have a national space agency in Singapore, not yet at least, but we work together with many agencies to support, coordinate all elements of space activities in Singapore, and to some degree as well to the larger and wider ASEAN and Southeast Asia region. Yeah. So we cover a lot of industry development engagements. We're actually born as a trade association, trade federation if I may. We are restructured, and now in a way we are a group of companies that oversees different elements. So under our portfolio, we have about 120 or so corporate partners and members. 20% are local, 80% comes from quite a wide range. I know some of you here are, and including the wider range of international OEMs and partners. We also work with young companies. We run the National Space Accelerator in Singapore, where we have a portfolio of about 40 or so startups. Again, about 40% are local and 60% are locally based foreign companies and startups, and others that have also joined the program and onboarded, a lot of them, of course, over the pandemic where they could not set up overseas operations. So again, in a way, we help to accelerate them, sketch to scale, capitalize them, get them market access, not just in Singapore for programs, and development efforts, but also access to the wider opportunities in space for the wider Asia-Pacific region. And when I specifically highlight space, space for space, in Asia the context is very terrestrial looking. We have a lot of data exploitation companies, we have of course advanced manufacturing players, certain launch companies here and there, but a lot of it is also on the data exploitation for vertical industries that are using and utilizing space data. Yeah, so in that respect, it's Earth observation, GNSS, communications, and the whole gambit. Yeah, so anything that I think has a commercial opportunity for satellite data, that's where I think Singapore goes after to ensure that there's sufficient commercial ROI for our younger companies to sustain themselves, especially over the next couple of years. Yeah. The last piece is we do a lot of technology scouting, horizon scanning for organizations and also industry partners within not only Singapore, but again the region, or also for partners that are looking to leverage on the wider Asia-Pacific market through Singapore. Right? So this is another element that we also focus on. The last piece is we run thought leadership platforms in Singapore as well for the world. Every February, and I know some of you are in attendance, the Global Space and Technology Convention is held in Singapore, the 1,200-man show. We've been running that since 2008. Platform is open internationally for thought leaders, for companies, pitch sessions, basically end-to-end for the global space community. So we do our very best to support the international partnerships, collaborations within Singapore, and of course between Singapore and our wider international partners. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Matias Campos. I'm from Astralinto Space Technologies in Ecuador. I want to thank the Slovak Space Office for organizing this forum, which I'm delighted to be part of because Astralinto Space Technologies is all about building bridges. So Astralinto was designed to show people, especially in Latin America, that everything is possible, even space, and change that mindset for our young generations. So what we do is space logistics and ground segment operations from latitude 0. I know some companies in these forums claim they are close to the equator. We're at the equator. And well, I could tell you more about Astralinto Space Technologies, but I'm delighted to share that we will be pitching at the final for the startup competition on Tuesday at the NO2. So if you want to hear more, you're welcome to come. But today I want to focus more about what we're doing as Astralinto in advocacy platforms like the IAF to promote and build more bridges. Okay? So recently, I'm also a member of the Sideralis Foundation, which is an Ecuadorian foundation in charge of talking about space in our regions. At Sideralis, we hosted the GLEC, the Global Conference on Emerging Countries for Space, and I see a lot of people in the crowd that attended the event, so thank you for being here and also for continuing those conversations we started in Quito earlier this year on how to get more involvement of space emerging countries with industry. So I'm happy to share that a lot of, after GLEC, a lot of traction got generated, a lot of contacts, a lot of networking happened. Okay, so for example, here with Veronica here, some Latin American companies in Guatemala, in Costa Rica have recently signed an MOA to do some collaboration with Nanorax. Myself, Astralinto Space Technologies, signed a commercial agreement with the Orbit to represent them in Latin America. So here we see that activities like this one, activities like this forum, activities like the GLEC that the IAF promotes, in fact, build bridges. Okay? And it's up to us to keep these bridges up, keep building them, and getting the region into space. So without further ado, I want to thank you all for being here, and I'm happy to be at the conversation.
Hello everyone, my name is Raicho. I'm founder and CEO of Endurosat. Our story is a bit interesting because we actually created from nothing, the entire new space economy in Bulgaria. We're from a country that still has no space agency, and we bootstrapped our satellite technology and operations. Nowadays, Endurosat is one of the world leaders in nanosatellite manufacturing operations in orbit, and we do even very complex missions. We proudly serve more than 150 customers around the planet. The biggest innovation that we have done is that we designed our satellites to be software-defined, technically flying server in orbit, capable of delivering any type of sensor without the customer having to modify the satellite hardware, something very unique for otherwise very hardware-centric technology sector. And this meant that our satellites could execute any type of mission without us having to modify the platforms. Interestingly, when we started 7 years ago, the company, there was no space education in the country. So we started by aligning ourselves and collaborating with one of the best universities in the region, created our own educational program, again bootstrapping it, and all the co-founders of the company came from our own educational program. And today more than 50% of our staff, already more than 110 people, are also coming from this. I'm really here to share our experience because we actually created from zero a vibrant space program competing on world level, one of the leaders on the planet. And I firmly believe that this model could be replicated in every other emerging leader or emerging country. And it's not necessarily to start with a huge budget and huge ambitions, but actually to build firm foot on the ground by education and by leapfrogging what already exists on the market. So looking forward to discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Temida. I'm the Managing Director for Space in Africa. We are an analytics and consulting company focusing on the African space and satellites industry. We're based in Lagos, Nigeria, and we mostly do work with national space agencies and government institutions to develop policies and strategies around the National Space Program and also implement specific space-related projects. Just last year, for example, we led baseline studies for the implementation and operationalization of the African Space Agency for the African Union Commission. In addition to this, we do a lot of work with commercial companies within and outside of Africa to explore business opportunities within the ecosystem. We've done several works with clients in the US, in Europe, and in Asia to explore different levels of opportunities in different segments of the African space and satellite industry. And today I look forward to an interesting conversation here about bridging the gap between emerging space countries and the established ones. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our speakers for introducing what are they doing in terms of building bridges between the industries. So now I'm opening the main part of our discussion and we are going to get to the survey. So let me start with the first batch of questions. Definition. What is the emerging space country? And in some aspects, what is the emerging space industry? There was a multiple choice and we ask, for example, dynamic developing space governance, dynamic space eco-growth, early stage of space sector, limited budget, limited space sector size. So based on the survey between our speakers, the biggest consensus is defined by early stage of space sector development. And the last one represents the dynamics of developing the space governance, so the institutionalization, which seems very interesting point for discussion. So at the one side, early stage, and the second size, less of the dynamic of the space government. So I would start with a round of each speaker, and please make your comments on the survey results. You can also point what was your choice here.
I think mine was definitely actually at the smallest one, dynamic development and space governance, because we have a big space law program and we have a huge amount of demand for this from countries that say they understand that to drive investment and investor confidence, they need a space legislation and regulation. We don't tell them what to do, we just provide different models. But for me, developing the infrastructure, your legislative infrastructure, brings the investment and provides a commitment from the government, a political commitment to move forward. So for me, that's actually quite important.
Thank you. So I also, like, one of my answers was the early stage of the development, because this is, I guess, it's what brings together the different emerging countries that can be taken into account. Eventually, I think that several different institutions have been trying to define what an emerging country is. I guess that there's plenty of different factors that needs to be taken into account. One of those can be indeed like governance and the development of governance models. So the space agency can be one of those, but in general terms, I mean, it also depends on the support that you can get from the government and from the public institutions in terms of funding, but also in terms of structuring the space program themselves. And then the limited space sector size can also be like one of the elements taken into consideration, trying to understand whether this limit comes from the capacity, for instance, technological capacity or the political capacity. So there again, there needs to be seen, and the engagement of the industry with the different stakeholders.
Yeah, so when I saw the question, actually, I was thinking every one of these questions is an element of defining the emerging space country. So I would like to choose the one a little bit out of the box, like the nature of Nanorax, that was a pathfinder, an initiator, a pioneer to unlock the venue to space. So basically, my answer was the dynamic space sector growth, in a way that from one side, you know, there is maybe less attractiveness to go to the emerging space country because they have a limited budget and they have a limited size of the space sector. even though for an actor as a Nanorax it's interesting to engage them to move forward, to have more opportunity to enabling them to have a more dynamic space growth. Thank you.
I completely agree with Veronica on this. Definitely early stage of space sector development is one of the key defining factors, but I would say that similarly important is exactly the dynamic space sector growth, because if an ecosystem or a country has a small space sector and it doesn't grow and there is no dynamics, then we wouldn't probably call it emerging space country. It would be basically non-space country mostly. And really the reason why country starts doing these kind of activities or the result of these kind of activities aimed at become a spacefaring nation can be, in my view, defined by that the things are moving forward and there is a growth of interest among the companies. There is a push, let's say, to find either private or public investments into the sector, and all these together enable that the number of companies grow or the research institutions are getting involved.
Thank you. I agree with my colleagues. I'm pretty sure I was early stage of space sector development. I think that is a primary characteristic of emerging space countries. But if I guess we are all in that bucket, to me, I guess that's the good news, because everything else can evolve, and that's where, as you change that dynamics of being early stage to growth stage, everything else will fall into place. In Singapore's case, we don't have much of a space hinterland. We have to find ways to extract space into other commercially or translatable means, right? So that our companies and government organizations can see the value of utilizing space and space data specifically. So we have worked very hard actually to convince, I guess, our partners, organizations, government agencies to see the value. And I think satellite, space for space, cannot be just our way, it's space for everything else. And that's why we work very hard to find many adjacent industries to bring into our fold, right, to leverage and that force multiplier of satellite data into other fields, right? With that, then you move from, I guess, emergent to growth and beyond, yeah?
Thank you. On my side, I want to comment. I'm the vice chair of the Administrative Committee for Emerging Countries here at the IAF, and this is we fight about this a lot, how to define the emerging countries. Because, for example, of course, you would assume that the developing countries are emerging countries, but there are some developed countries that are also emerging space countries. A quick example could be Australia. Australia has the space agency is almost 3 years old, I think, maybe 4. But they are members of the committee, and it's very interesting to see the dynamic within the committee, because it's very different to, like in my case, to develop the Ecuadorian space sector versus developing the Australian space sector. But still there are some synergies, and having conversations like this help us to grow together, to see, for example, European companies or American companies feel more comfortable working with Australians than with the Latin Americans, but trying to see how that works and also sharing those thoughts with the other emerging space countries is the way to go. And I really like this answer, because you see that it's a little bit of everything, and it really depends on case by case from which country, because in some countries you have money, but you don't have a regulation. In others you have regulation support, but you don't have money. And it's about doing that mix and match and trying to see what's the best roadmap for the given country.
In my opinion, as an entrepreneur, I bet on the entrepreneurs to build each developing country or emerging leader country in space programs. I don't really believe you start with regulating something that does not exist. And on top of that, as an entrepreneur, I think that the best possible thing for a government, especially in a new sector that does not know what to do, is to not regulate it, but to leave the open market to self-regulate itself. I really believe that the future of emerging countries and those who really find a way to incentivize entrepreneurs to go into new sectors will be the winners, and those who start with trying to formally create enormous amount of energy and put all their energy in administration or work, agencies, different fundings are not going to be as successful. This is my opinion.
Thank you very much. I agree with what most of the speakers have said. think there are several factors that define what an emerging space country is, and even if we look at the trajectory of the industry in the last couple of decades, we'll see that a lot of things have changed. For example, before government see it as their responsibilities to develop space capabilities and set up an agency to manage all of this, but we're also seeing a shift to the private sector whereby governments can just empower the private sector to build these capabilities, and they can build sovereignty out of that. So there's a lot of factors that play a key role in this. And what Rachel said about the regulations, and I think it's still important for any government that is serious with building a space program to create a governing structure that would create the sort of environment where entrepreneurship can actually thrive. So, because if you just leave that out, things may not happen. But when you create intentional policies that would attract, for example, foreign companies, or that would put investors' mind at peace, then you'll be able to create an ecosystem out of that.
Thank you very much. So now it's time for the audience. And I have a question for all of you. Please raise your hand if you consider you're coming from emerging space country. Okay, so it seems almost like 50-50, which is very good. So is there anyone in the audience like to make a comment on this particular survey question? Please, go ahead. Introduce yourself, please.
Good morning. My name is Pilar Zamora from Colombian Space Agency. And about a limited budget, I think that there is not true that we have an unlimited budget. I think that the problem is that in our organizations, governments, country, the citizens don't know or don't have so knowledge about what they can do with the space technology, with the information. And in that sense, for example, in Colombia, we lose so money, so governmental, so money in the industry, in our different economies, expanded because we don't know, for example, that the Earth observation exists. No, in some places we think that we need to go in person to some places to see, for example, the agriculture, to see other process. So I think that if we really cooperate in education programs, in share really what we can do with the space technology, that the space is for our Earth. Space is, yes, it's for space too, but if you share the applications that we can really build and give social solutions, I think that we can have this risk about the limited budget.
Thank you very much. It was a very interesting comment. Very quickly.
Yes, thank you. Just I wanted to add something on top of what has been said by saying that for sure the economic part, indeed lively, for instance, and very active industrial segment, it's key. But at the same time, without a governance that can indeed bring together all what we've been saying, so the development of the program, all the resources, and use that in an effective way to communicate, but also like to manage the funding opportunities, to the partnership development, this is also key. And that's why in the definition of the emerging country, the consideration of the governance is always like a key point, let's say, that to understand the maturity also of the country itself.
Thank you. So now let's turn to another question. The potential. Where do you see the main source of potential for further space sector development grow in emerging country? So we have new companies and startups and technology transfer in between academia and business collaboration as the very significant elements for increasing the potential. So I will ask for a very quick round, and we'll start from that side now.
Thank you very much. So I think that when we also define emerging countries, we often define that in the context of the established countries. So, for example, we look at the US, where they've got a lot of things figured out, and then we look at other countries with respect to that, like, okay, this is the model of how an established space nation should be, but I don't think that should be the case because governments have different priorities. So some countries don't want to do exploration, for example. For some countries, it's just about space application. But if they don't do exploration, it doesn't mean that they are less of an established space nation. And I think that this is very critical. And talking about what should be the potential for further space sector development for emerging countries, I think this is also, based on individual countries, because different governments have different priorities, and for some it's about the economies of the industry. For others, it's about the research and development. So I think all of these factors play a key role, but this is a question for the government to decide what the priorities should be.
Again, I think the priority should be on the entrepreneurs because those are the people building every single part of the economy sectors that we live today. And I think the government roles in the development world, governments and new space commerce should be just to understand what are the biggest hurdles of the entrepreneurs, how they can excel more and nothing else at the early stages at least of development. Today we are helping quite a few nations to start off their programs the same way. Most of them struggled at the beginning going to really established space players. They sold them very expensive technology. They had zero learning curve in the process, and this was a governmentally run program. So I imagine you have two choices: buy a satellite that you don't actually need for 100 million as a small nation dreaming about space, with zero results, literally objectively zero results, or spending 100 million in risky investments in your own ecosystem to teach the entrepreneurs how they can join space sector. So this is I totally aim for the new space startups and companies, and I hope that more emerging countries are optimistic about these decisions.
Thank you, Raiko. Following up on that, and representing the Latin American and Caribbean group here in the Federation, I'm happy to share that the startups and new space companies from the region are leading the way. Of course, traditional space for us was not a possibility. Our government's having other priorities with education and healthcare. But now that the space is being privatized, companies from Mexico down to Argentina are bringing space to the region. And it's not like we go and say, oh, please come to our countries and do things for us, like put some antennas or come and sell us a satellite, as Raiko was saying, and then we don't know how to operate it, and the government just doesn't have the infrastructure in place to handle it, but rather work together with us. For example, Mexican Dirium Labs works together with Airbus, hand to hand. It's not a position of developed countries, developed companies are superior. It's more like, hey, let's work together. There's an interest of us of learning from you, but there's interest of you in the region. So let's work together. As I was mentioning in Central America with the microgravity experiments, and also space logistics ground segment in the middle, and a success case is Halogic also in Argentina. So you see how the region is progressing through space startups in the new space era.
Thank you. So I think all these pieces are very important. By definition, if you are an emerging space country, you probably have a lot of challenges. Budget, governance, and so on and so forth. So in my view, I think the first area that one should consider is the economic impact of the space industry to your own country. Right? I fully agree with my colleagues here. There's no point either trying to compete with the big players. You're not in the same space, never will be, right? And again, it is very different in your geographic or environmental requirements, right? So I think you have to suit your own and identify what your local industries and requirements actually are, and then that's where you start to pick and choose and of course pivot whatever you're looking at to develop. Even the young companies and startups in a particular country need to align with those areas, because if you can demonstrate that there's an economic or return, right, to the government, to the country, to your other commercial partners, the rest of the support would naturally come. If there's no impact, and I guess we see this in our accelerator, right? A lot of companies, they come up with the best technology, every startup, the best in the world, right? But there's no end objective in mind, right? Or you have just built technology for something which you don't know, like the $100 million satellite example, right? Then you are finished, right? Then you're doomed from day one, right? So I think one of the key things here that I wanted to highlight, I'm pretty sure I also selected it, was spinning in the non-traditional industries into the space sector. I'll give you an example. We don't do space for space. If we want to manufacture satellites, for example, yes, we do need qualification, high quality, and of course, clear OEM capabilities to help you with the AIT test facilities and some of the ruggedization of the satellites. But a general broad-based satellite can be built by EMS companies, right? And many countries, emergent, growth, and established countries all have a domestic baseload of electronics field. Right? So Singapore has an electronics industry. We don't have space companies when we started out 20 years ago, but we have electronics companies. Can we teach those guys to go into space? Actually, it was the other way around. They taught us how to do it because these guys built, they can spit out mobile phones at 1 million a line, They don't need our help, right? They may need help to go to space, maybe, but they can do this low cost, right? And they control a large, dashboard of supply chain in electronics components anyway, right? If you buy it from somebody else at a tier 1 OEM, you pay a premium. You buy it from a Jebil or Flextronics or somebody else, you get half the price, right? So, and these guys are based everywhere around the world with 100 sites. Their geographical footprint is wide. You can leverage on these guys to leapfrog, and build a space case, right, for the country. So that, I think, is something very critical when you look at what's important for an emergent space country.
Excellent points. My colleagues on the left, there is very little to add. I really liked what said Temida in the very beginning. There is no generalization here. Each country has its specifics. And it's very important, therefore, so that the country tries to do an assessment in the beginning of the sector development process to find and to see where the potential actually lies. We did this in the very beginning in 2019, where we started the ecosystem development, and we found out that there are basically 3 pillars. They are all here. We did the survey, so of course they're here. And that's the new companies and startups, which is an obvious choice for most of the people when they've been asked. The technology transfer, as I mentioned, the academic heritage in our case was 50 years old, so there is a lot of potential there. But very important, what also now Jonathan underlined, is the spinning in. And this was actually the very first that we tackled, because we understood that, first of all, you can use what's already invented, you can use what's already developed for terrestrial use, and it might even have very strong competitive edge on the regional or even global scale, and it's very pity to simply leave it there and not to try to bring it to the space sector, as for example electronics, as for example mechatronical components or software. So we started approaching these technological companies in these relevant areas, and this was actually the first incoming ones, and the way how we managed to do the first growth in the first years. And this was also growth which was quite sustainable, because compared to startups, which can have certain death rate problem, if you bring a company which is well-based in terrestrial sector, they tend to be a bit more stable. So if one project doesn't go well, it's not always the case that they have to fold and they have to leave the game. They might try it again and again. So this is also a way how to try to make the very beginning and the very base of the sector stable and well-based.
Okay, so looking at the question, my answer was technology transfer, academia, business collaboration. Basically, as a Nanorax, we start actually with just providing the servicing to the startup. So it was an element to find startup in emerging country. And then we understood that basically to increase the alliance, we should go beyond just serving them their needs. So it's very important for our business model to locally find a partner that we transfer the technology in order to enlarge the overall potential of the local area where the partner is located. Thank you.
So, I have to say that I agree with all the predecessors in saying that all those points are actually describing the potential and can enhance the potential of emerging space countries. For sure, what I want to say is that cross-fertilization and the spinning in, it's very, very important in order to make sure that what is already existing indeed can be brought into the space field, and that can be like, let's say, again, improved by what space data can contribute. The collaboration, it's very, very important, because only through synergies, I mean, we can actually, once again, enhance the potential of the countries. So I would say that indeed this is, it was my answer and what I believe that can really, really like make the difference in emerging countries.
I would say technology transfer in academia and business, and I want to give you an example. One of the things that most countries say to us is they need access. They don't need funding so much. They need access to data, access to platforms. One thing we have is we just did a project where Thailand submitted a proposal for a water meal. It's a plant that's very hardy, and it's going to be the first plant that's ever tested in a full life cycle of a plant. And it's something that could be eventually the basis of long-term spaceflight nutrition. And they need access that's going to fly up on the space station. And again, this is coming from Thailand. It's not coming from NASA. It's not coming from ESA. So I think technology transfer and access to platforms is what really will drive this development. Also because that could create an ecosystem in Thailand around space-based nutrition and space-based botany, et cetera. So that's something we're really banking on.
Thank you very much. The time flies very fast, and therefore I'm switching to the fast mode, and I give the opportunity to someone from the audience to make a comment. Yes, please, lady over there.
Hi everyone, I'm Sindhu from India. I'm actually working with a few more young professionals for Asia Pacific Sustainable Space Community Development, and we have been researching about ASEAN countries and a few more Asia Pacific countries for the past 1.5 years. And I have a couple of comments for the first and the second. For the first, we also observed that the emerging countries have been working on developing the new space sector in parallel with their national space agencies. So I agree with her on space governance being an important key feature for defining the emerging space country. And for this one, technology transfer, there is also academia collaborations that we have observed quite extensively in the Asia Pacific region. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we turn to another one. Challenges. What do you see the main challenges emerging space ecosystem is facing on its way to growth? Lack of political interest. So I'll give the chance to talk to political institutions. United Nations, you have an award.
Yeah, this is something that actually we've been hearing a lot about. A lot of spacefaring nations, emerging nations, they all tell us we don't need the funding, right? It's exactly what you said. We need the political support. So they come to us because the United Nations as a neutral arbiter gives kind of an imprimatur of the importance and the gravitas of the importance of the space sector. So they need us to partner with them to convince their own political class to invest in space. And so we see that increasingly as an important function for us.
I agree totally on this point.
And I choose another speaker from this side, Astralindu.
Okay, thank you. Yes, as you see, there's a lot of challenges, and that summarizes my life as an emerging countries entrepreneur in a way. But yeah, the government is, for example, in Ecuador, after the GLEC is when the government really saw there's potential here. Okay, they saw that all the heads of agencies that were there, all the CEOs and high-rank people from the space industry that were there, and they were there because they had interest in working with us. And then the government said, like, okay, let's do it. And now they're supporting us. And yeah, it's once you have that, the other things start flowing, but still challenging.
Anyone from the speakers would like to make a specific comment on that? No? Audience? The first one was lady behind there. A short one, please.
I think a lot of the factors that we mentioned here, these are problems because we failed to address a few points in the previous slide, which is the soft factors of how to develop a space sector. And this could focus on the ease of doing business, and it doesn't matter with which stakeholder it is. The government or the regulators, they do not speak the same language as the industry. And often these bridges are harder to build than most others. So I think there should be a stronger focus on the softer aspects where rules, regulations, policies, or whatever are made more accessible to the different parties in the ecosystem so that we can fix some of these things listed here.
Excellent. Someone else from the audience? There is a one. Yeah, I'm running towards. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Madin. I'm from the Maldives, and I'm from the Maldives Space Research Organization. We're very young. We're actually just a few months old now. And there's a very clear, one of the biggest issues we have is the lack of public interest, but I would say it's more about public awareness. And I think it also ties into the previous slide where, yes, we need technology transfer, we need startups, but that's further down the road. We need indigenous population to actually understand what space can do for them, so that they can then themselves start to push the political interest to take action. So a lot of times what we see in the Maldives example is like space is still very foreign, like what space can do for the ocean, for example, or what space can do for the climate. This is something that we're seeing that we definitely need to address that gap of awareness. And this is not through necessarily academic collaborations, because that is also further down the road. This is really through by talking to them where they live, where they are, hosting events, for example, in the islands. And this is very specific to the Maldives, but we see quite a bit in other developing nations as well, where we don't really address the indigenous population in an area that is being targeted. We're still at the very higher level, at an academic and institutional level, and we should target the indigenous level. Yep.
Thank you very much. So let's go to another one. Strategy. What should be emerging space countries' main goals when it comes to space ecosystem development? Increase national technological capabilities, so technology. Who from the speakers would like to make a comment on this? Michal?
So this is pretty much connected to the challenges, and we started this with identifying the challenges, which were mainly two in the case. It was the small ecosystem, limited ecosystem, which meant that there are issues with creating synergies within the ecosystem, because if you have very few dots, it's very difficult to connect them, and just a few of these dots can be connected with each other, because one is doing software for, let's say, planning missions, one is doing hardware, one is doing Earth observation applications, so you cannot connect everybody. Secondly, the challenge number two was little awareness out abroad about the existing capabilities. So therefore, the strategic tools that we try to implement were first to increase the number of companies so you can create synergies more easily, and secondly, to increase the awareness so the companies which are already doing something can get in touch with their partners and they can present that they are capable of doing something, because in space, you very often have old networks and very well-built networks within existing strong companies, and it's not that easy to penetrate them often. So I think that the increased number of companies, increase the technological capabilities, and also the awareness are very important.
Thank you. Audience, anyone willing? Oh yes, I will get here. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Zinzi Koenig. I'm from the Southwestern Oregon Community College in the United States, and I believe this main goal should be, and this explains much, the addresses of ecological problems, which can build confidence, binding measures, and increase the long-term sustainability of outer space activities for the peaceful purposes.
Thank you. This was a very nice comment, because indeed the ecological problems are less core than the satellite services are a lot about the ecology, right? And now we're challenging a lot of changes. So let me turn to another question, tools. What main tools, measures should emerging space countries use to further develop their space ecosystem? And we have a supportive legislation, government funding, and helping with attracting private investments. Industry partners. Androsat.
I think absolutely the government should have a supporting role, meaning the least amount of regulation at the beginning and the maximum amount of streamlining entrepreneurs in their own community, respecting the cultural and the political and economical senses of their own communities. Attracting risk capital is super important because risk capitals are teaching entrepreneurs how they can start from day one to think about the market realization of their technology, and potentially some collaboration between already existing, hopefully if they have, some cases they don't, good educational program in technology where they can spin into the space ecosystem some additional ideas.
Anyone else from the speakers, United Nations?
One of the things that we hear is that people say it's the technology transfer support. People will tell us again, we don't need the financing, we need in-kind contributions. Also because when you approach an entity and you say, I would like funding, everyone recoils, right? We've all been through that. But when you say, I need an expert, I need a platform, I think that's where really the connections are made. They can prove themselves and then the funding comes. So for us, we're really focusing on providing that sort of linkage with the tools, the access, and we do workshops, we do all sorts of educational programs so that they can get the expertise and then build their program from there.
Thank you very much. Audience? Hey.
I think that we can put on the list the investment funds and the venture capital funds. I think that will be a great idea. And the other, I think that in the Latin American case, will be great to have a framework with the political and multilateral entities. For example, in Latin America, we had an Andean community. So maybe we can take the similar case from Africa, and we can copy in Latin America and create a framework for the political makers.
Thank you very much. Anybody else from the audience? Yeah, please.
Hi, my name's Austin Dimitri. I'm from Newmark Knight Frank. We're a real estate company, and my group does global consulting on attracting foreign investment and domestic investment for our clients. And so, translating that, we help economic development agencies that have sites and places for investment for, say, an EV or battery farm, new industries, emerging industries. And I'm hearing the challenges that you're facing, and I'm translating it to what I do for a living in terms of attracting investment and helping my clients attract investment. And so there are a number of terrestrial industries, thinking about it from a commercial standpoint, because that's what's going to attract investment. So hearing those industries, hearing these reasons here for what your challenges and your tools are very similar to what I do. And I'm interested in, beyond the sectors, which companies are you targeting as well? Who are going to be the first movers? I'm thinking about the last huge commercial development was the internet, right? You had Netscape, AOL, no longer here, but now you've got Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Netflix, Google. Who are going to be those companies that are going to really fund the technology investment for space exploration?
Thank you very much for your comment. And we are now going to the last question. Collaboration opportunities. Where do you see the main opportunities for collaboration involving the emerging space countries? And it is the industrial collaboration. So who would like, from the speakers, make a comment here? Androsat.
Again, we have already experience working with several emerging countries and helping them build their own capability. The question comes to the countries and the regions themselves. Do you want to be a user or a player? If you want to be a player in any industry, you have to put the strong fundamentals, the educational programs. You have, again, to leave absolutely as much as possible freedom to your own entrepreneurs to grow, and you have to have endurance. Why endurance? Because it takes at least a decade or more for you and your efforts to go further in time, and this is one of the biggest challenges in developing worlds, because the developing countries usually have very dynamically changing policies. Different governments are going away in a few months, and this might jeopardize the efforts. But you can absolutely bootstrap a leading space program. We are the proof of it. I'm really happy, and I'm pretty sure this model could be replicated in any other environment, using and respecting the local culture and specificities.
Anyone else? Yes, please.
So I want to say that if for collaboration, I think it's very important to attend these events. So if you are in an emerging country, coming to these events, getting the chance to talk to people from the industry, but also for people from established places in industry. These events, before perhaps it was more of all people from established space actors, but now there's a lot of emerging countries. So if you go around, you'll see students from Costa Rica, from Guatemala, from Mexico, from Peru. Take a chance to talk to them. Also, through the ACDC, the Committee for Emerging Countries, we always have an emerging countries booth. So it's booth 828. So if you go to the exhibition hall, of course you can go NASA, Lockheed, but also take a chance to talk to the emerging space countries. You'll be surprised by the ingenuity, by the talent that these young people have from Latin America, from Africa, that are there, and they're eager to talk, to learn, to continue growing, and coming to places like this is the way to go. And in that same note, also join the committees of the IAF. For the ACDC, we have members not only from emerging countries, but from established space actors, and they join the committee to help, to collaborate, to see what's happening, and it's very valuable to have those members on the committee. And likewise with the sub-regional committees, it's great to have you. We have African, we have Asia Pacific, we have Middle East, and we have Latin American. And all of those report to the ACDC, and then the ACDC reports back to the IAF Bureau. So there's a way of getting emerging countries and collaboration through the system of the Federation to get more opportunities. So you're all invited to participate from that.
I think they are quite equally important, but if the country really aims at being not just the client of space technologies, but to provide and create value in terms of space technology, then the industrial collaborations are definitely crucial. We see it on our case on how connections with larger, mainly European, large system integrators and smaller SME companies is helping the growing ecosystem and the startups and smaller, newer companies, because they don't only learn a lot from these larger partners, but they also see how they should, in which direction they should go, so they can find relevant clients in the future for their businesses.
Nanorax.
Yes, I would like to add, to the inputs and the answer that from my previous panelists here. I think in the space sector, it's particularly important to have this sort of tango. You have one step in front and double back, in a way that you need to have a front runner. That is always science, technology. So the front runner, the R&D is very, very important, because creates the needs to have something. And to have something, the something comes from the implementation, from the industry. So, this type of tandem is particularly important to move forward the capability of the emerging country. Of course, the work, the space technology, science advancement, so on, started many years ago. They would like to keep on board. Please don't make the mistake to say that you want to start reinventing the wheel. Just start now and keep the technology level is available at global level. That's why it's very important to have the opportunity to work with established company in a way that they can transfer the technology, the needs, the access, and to move on the local capability. So I have seen here in the audience a number of countries that they are emerging in the space domain. If you work with the Nanorax, we will not leave you alone after just the launch and the access of the VISTA experience. We would like to grow together to enlarge participation. Thank you.
So, and the last moments belongs to you, the audience. The gentleman over there was the first. And please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm not from a company. I am from India, which is not an emerging space nation either. But the reason I just wanted to say something to this audience is that I had an office called In Space, which is a newly created office in India, with the objective of promoting space in the private industry. Okay? So everything that you talked about here are issues that we are grappling with right now as to how do we enable private industry, especially young private industry, to come into space. So if any of you have an interest in exploring Indian space sector, Indian space economy, please feel free to contact InSpace. We have a global knowledge forum on Wednesday, so you can participate there also to get more information, but all this discussion is very relevant to what we are doing in India.
Thank you very much. Yes?
Thank you. So my name is Tejumala Taiwo. I'm an assistant professor of space system engineering at the International Space University. So when I'm in a meeting like this, so I have two caps. I'm from Nigeria, and I live in France. I did my grad school in Japan at QTech. I mean, QTech is the world #1 university with the highest number of CubeSats in the whole world. And I've worked on satellite projects that are in space. So this kind of discussion, I would say the most important thing that developing countries, emerging space countries should seek for is capacity development, training, education. All of these other points will come. How to fix your R&D will come if you understand what space can do for you. How to fix your industry will come if you understand how space fits into different aspects of your industry. Without this, without education, so I see many young people from developing countries in a meeting like this, and after 2 years, 3 years, many of them fizzle out. They cannot continue to fit in because they don't have the requisite education, which is very, very important. So, I mean, if you are from developing country here, if you are from emerging space nation here, the only point, the important tool is education. If you get education, you will fix all these other points. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Important comment. Yes? And then I'll be better.
I would like to thank the person that just spoke from Nigeria. I agree, education is the most important part of this development, but part of that is the last one too, sharing the best practices of good governance in space so that we can have these relationships and investments collaborations to help build the confidence we can have in one another in space by sharing governance practices. Thank you.
Thank you, and I promise the last word, the lady over there.
Hi, thank you. So Diana De Toro from the United States. Some of the things that we've talked about, a lot of sharing education, training, some accesses that we've talked about, and we've talked about a lot about partnerships. And I'm just wondering if I could maybe talk, I guess, afterwards, the applicability of some of the relationships that we already have with some developing programs and emerging space actors is with government, yes, but particularly in the defense sector, where the militaries cooperate and learn from one another and teach one another. And so I'm interested in learning more about that, hearing about that, because I think there's some tremendous training opportunities and subject matter experts that come from that. And so I'd just offer not to forget about that portion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now this is the end of our special session. And first of all, I would like to thank you to our speakers. A small applause for them, please. Second of all, and more important for you, the audience, to coming and to discuss with us. Big applause to you as well. And please do not hesitate to come approach to any of the speakers that were present here today and continue on this important discussion about the emerging space ecosystem and how we can make space available for all. Thank you very much.